Hey makers, welcome into Jewel School. I'm Laura, and today we are making a teardrop charm necklace. Okay, so today we're making a teardrop charm necklace, and I am going to be using briolette. I say briolets. I know everyone else says briolettes. I'm going to say brios for this demo. So I'm going to be using brios to make some little charm clusters for necklaces. And I made this first one out of these crystal teardrops that we used to have and these labradorite beads. Today we're going to be using some yellow opal and some fire opal, and then some sunstone and feldspar. I want to show you guys kind of a simple but unique, easy way to wire wrap your brios. Add some visual interest to the top with those smaller beads up there. But I wanted to kind of break the impression that brios are hard to work with. We're gonna make them exciting. There's so much more that you can do besides just wire wrapping a loop on top. We're gonna make them really fun, and you guys are gonna love this. Let's talk about the tools and supplies that we're gonna use for this project. We are going to use several hammers. We're going to use a chasing hammer, a rawhide mallet, a ring mandrel, a bench block, our chain nose pliers, round nose pliers, flush cutter, 2 of our yellow opal teardrops, 1 fire opal, our sunstone and feldspar tiny beads, a piece of chain, a jump ring, and 18 gauge wire. All right, guys, let's get started. The first thing that we are gonna do is we're gonna make that little charm holder that we're gonna attach all of our brios to. So let's get going with that. We're gonna use our bench block and our ring mandrel and our hammers for that. So we will come back to the brios in just a minute. So we're gonna be using 18 gauge wire because I want this, this charm holder to have some substance to it. I want it to be sturdy. I want to be able to hammer it and add some texture to it. And the larger you go in your wire, the better the better result you're going to have in the end. This is a pear wire. This is one of our specialty craft wires that we have at JTV, and this is like the cream of the crop when it comes to craft wire. So this is a coated wire, but you couldn't tell looking at it that it was coated wire. It acts like, you know, your regular gold filled wire or a solid gold wire. It acts just the same. It is really top of the line, and I don't hesitate to use this craft wire at all. So I'm gonna cut myself a couple inches, more like 6 inches. That's probably too much, but that's okay. And we are going to use our ring mandrel to kind of create our circular shape. If you want a bigger charm holder, you can go bigger. You don't have to go with just the size of the ring mandrel, but that's what I'm going to be using today. So I'm going to go like wrap this wire all the way down the bottom to the bottom of my ring mandrel here, and I just want to overlap it a little bit. And I'm just doing this to kind of get a circle shape, but it's going to kind of bounce open, and when I pull it off, I'm not really worried about that. But I can do a little hammering at this point. So I'm just going to pull this tight. And then I'm going to go in with my rawhide mallet. And we're gonna just start work hardening this a little bit. But we're gonna do most of our hammering on our bench block, but this ring mandrel is gonna just help us get a nice circular shape. So then I'm gonna create 2 loops at the top. So I want those 2 loops to come overlap together like they do right here. Like this is actually 2 pieces that slide back together and then connect with the jump ring. So I want to create those loops up there at the top. So I've got my 2 open ends of my wire here, and I'm just going to find the middle up here and use my round nose pliers to start creating my loops. I'm going to come down about almost halfway down my round nose plier, and I'm going to pull this this end around my plier and come back so that I've got a full loop there. And then I will trim that tail off like that. And then directly opposite that, I'm gonna make another loop the exact same way and the exact same size. So I'm gonna come back around my plier here. Pretty similar in size. I'm gonna cut, then we're going to cut that excess tail off here like this. And then I just want to go in with my chain nose pliers and I'm going to close these up a little bit. It's going to shrink the size of my loop a little bit, but that's okay. Just close those up. I think they're still pretty close to being the same size. I'm going to trim this one just a little bit so that it is just a little bit more round. It was looking a little oval and I just want to round it up a little bit. So I'm just going to trim like not even a millimeter. Here we go. And yeah, I just used Plier 61. We call it Plier 61 here. It's a really great flush cutter. It is one of those tools that you buy one and it's gonna last you for years and years. And when you're trying to cut teeny tiny little amounts of metal like that with the very tip of your flush cutter, you need a really high quality flush cutter that's going to stay sharp, because it's really hard if you've got a dull flush cutter or one that has like warps or grooves in it. It's going to be really hard to cut those teeny tiny little spaces. So Plier 61 on jtv.com for your flush cutters. And now we are going to do some hammering. This shape is going to change a little bit as we hammer, but I'm not worried about it. I kind of want it to turn into more of an oval shape, so I'm not worried about it getting bigger or changing its shape at all. But we are going to kind of separate that out so that we can actually hammer flat. So we're going to get this nice and flat with our rawhide mallet. Just really start to harden this. We want to really work hard in this. And if you don't know what work hardening it is when you harden the temper of a medium or a soft wire. So most wires come soft, like dead soft, or kind of a soft to medium temper. And that's great for wire wrapping and while you're working with your wire. But if you're creating something like a form out of your wire, that like this charm shape or charm holder, you want a really sturdy piece of wire that's not going to deform over time. And the way to do that with your wire is to work harden it. And hammering is one of the best ways to work harden your metal. So you're compressing, when you hammer down onto your wire, you're compressing those metal molecules, and they're getting closer and closer together. Your wire's getting denser and denser, and it's getting harder and harder to bend. So that's a really important thing when you're creating things out of wire for the longevity of your piece, is making sure that you're work hardening it before you attach anything to it or sell it or try to wear it, because it will kind of deform over time if you don't. And I always make sure I'm hammering from both sides. I usually flip it back and forth several times while I'm hammering, just to make sure that I'm getting all those little grooves out of it. Okay, so I am going to overlap this. I'm going to make sure. I'm kind of going to teardrop this a little bit by overlapping. And as I overlap and hammer, it starts to form more of a teardrop shape. And we can continue to exaggerate that teardrop by moving up the ring mandrel. So as you get smaller and smaller on your ring mandrel, this curve is getting tighter and tighter, and it's creating more of a teardrop shape. And I kind of wanted to carry that teardrop shape throughout the entire piece. So I've got this kind of oval teardrop charm holder, and then we've got these really elongated brios hanging down from that. So teardrop is the theme today. Okay, so now we're gonna go in with our chasing hammer and we're gonna add some texture. We're gonna flatten out some of this. We're gonna really make it unique. And again, really do some work hardening. You really get your hardness, most of your hardness from hammering steel on steel. So if you've got a steel bench block and a steel chasing hammer and you put your, relatively soft piece of wire in between those, that steel to steel is gonna give you the best hardening. Rawhide mallet is more of a safer option if you wanna go really slow. You can work harden it, but it's gonna take a lot longer with a rawhide mallet. So we will start hammering here. And I'm gonna concentrate more on the bottom of my teardrop shape. You can do an even texture all the way around, but I wanted to give it a little bit of interest by making a little wider spot at the bottom. So using the round, or the flat end of my chasing hammer. So I'm gonna hammer the whole thing flat. But like I said, I'm gonna concentrate more on that little bottom area. But I wanna make sure I'm, hardening the top part too. So I'm still gonna hammer up there, just not as much as I am towards the bottom. And you see how that's starting to kind of flatten out there at the bottom, and it's starting to look a little bit different than the top part. And if you want to direct your metal with your hammer, you can do that by using like kind of a swiping motion with your hammer, like really like drawing that metal in the direction that you want it to go with your hammer. And then I'm going to further exaggerate this difference in our thicknesses with the ball end of my hammer. That's gonna give you a really pinpointed hammer strike, and it's gonna move your metal a lot more than the flat side. So I'm gonna save that for the end. And it's gonna create like a dimpled texture in your the surface of your metal, which I like. And I go really slow at this part because it can kind of become this like never-ending thing of like, oh, I hammered a lot over here, so now I got to hammer more over here. And then you hammer too much on this side, and you got to go back. And all of a sudden, your wire is like a piece of paper. It's so thin. So go really slow and make sure that you're stepping back and taking like an overall look at your piece while you're doing it, and then going back and hammering specifically where you need to like change the shape of your piece. Now I'm gonna go back. I don't want too much dimply texture, so I'm gonna go back with my flat side and flatten that texture out just a little bit. And another thing when you're hammering, you always wanna stabilize one side of it, the opposite side of what you're hammering. So if I'm gonna hammer on this side, I wanna stabilize this side because like it's just gonna pop around on your mandrel and you could accidentally smash it like the wrong way, but it's also not really doing anything because you're not getting good contact with your bench block. So stabilizing it while you're hammering is gonna give you much better results and much quicker. So now I'm going to kind of pull these shapes together, and then I'm gonna flip this. So like I'll push them together, and then I'll flip it and push them together again so that I'm not getting, so that these stay aligned kind of with the center of my piece. And then I'm gonna do a little bit of hammering with these overlapped so that again, that my shape is not warped. And then I'm gonna, if I've gotten it a little misshapen, I can go in and do a little hammering and kind of reshape. Reshaping's not a word, I don't think. Reshape my shape. And I don't care that it's a little off center and a little crooked. I think that that kind of goes with the style of this, but if you're like really want it to be symmetrical, you just work with it until it looks the way you want it to look. Now we have got our little charm holder ready for some charms. So let's make our little brio or teardrop charms. Get some of this out of the way. Okay, so these are some of my favorite brios or teardrops that we have had at JTV. This yellow opal, it is so rare and it's faceted and it is stunning. There's such like every single one is so different, and you look at it, you look closely at it, and there's this whole world of swirls and colors. There's creams in there, and then there's browns and darker yellows in there. And there's such beautiful stones that I really wanted to do something that was gonna highlight the beauty of the stones. So if I have really beautiful gemstones, I keep my design very minimal and the focus is on the stone. And that's what we're gonna do today by creating these really beautiful teardrop shapes. All right, so let's make some teardrops. I've got 3 different sizes of teardrop shapes, and so we're gonna create kind of a tapered or a cascade effect with our different size teardrops, and then the little loops that we make at the top are gonna be different sizes too, to kind of further exaggerate that change in the height of our pieces. So we're gonna be using this 24 gauge wire. We have tons of wire sets on jtv.com, and they're really all the wire that we sell is very good quality, and we have an abundance of 24 gauge wire. And that, to me, 24 gauge is like what I use the most when I'm wire wrapping. It's kind of the most universal size when it comes to jewelry making wires. So if you don't have 24 gauge wire and you need some, we have plenty for you on jtv.com. Okay, so this brio, so if you don't know what a brio is, or briolette or briolette, it is a teardrop pear-shaped bead that is smaller up at the top, and they are usually drilled from side to side through the top. And that's usually what intimidates people, because it can get really thin up there, especially if with natural gemstones that are hand drilled. You can get a lot of variance in your drill holes, and they can get really close to the point, and they can be easy to break. But if you're comfortable and solid with your wire wrapping, you shouldn't run into too much breakage with your brios. And one of the ways that we can kind of counteract that fragility up there at the top is to do some like heavier wire wrapping up at the top. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that too. So I've got a couple inches, about maybe 5-6 inches of 24 gauge wire, and I will just string my yellow opal, and I'm going to pull it down to the middle of my wire, and then I'm going to fold my wire up around the point of that teardrop. Not too close. I don't want that crisscross to be really, I don't want it to be touching the point of my brio at all. I want it, just a hair above it, so that I'm not pressing down on that tip with my wire. So I've done a little crisscross, and then I'm gonna go in with you can use your fingers if you want, but I think it can get a little hard to manage your twist with your fingers. So I'm not gonna twist my brio. I'm gonna hold my brio stable, and I'm gonna twist my wire. So I'm gonna create some pressure on the tip of my brio here, and I'm gonna rotate this wire, give it a little twist with my pliers. And then I'm gonna pull one of these up straight, and then one of these is gonna point off to the side, and I'm gonna use this to wrap a couple times around the top of my brio. And this is kind of gonna help protect the point of your brio. And, we don't really have to worry about it with these yellow opals, because they're really thick all the way up to the top, but a lot of brios, they're kind of like a pear shape. They're fat at the bottom, and then from all angles, they taper up at the top. But these have a really nice thick top, so you don't have to worry too much about that point being too fragile. So just a couple wraps just to start kind of protecting the top of our Brio. And then I will trim that little piece off there and just gently tuck that tail in. I'm gonna wire wrap over all of this, so I'm not too worried about, you know, how this looks at all. You can straighten it up if you want to, but like I said, that's gonna be hidden under some more wire wrapping. So the next thing that we are gonna do is we're gonna string our small beads on, and we're gonna create that big loop at the top out of our small beads. And I am using these Sunstone and Feldspar teeny tiny beads. These are about 2 to 2.5 millimeters. They're really beautiful. They have kind of an iridescence to them, so they really catch the light nicely, but they're kind of a neutral, and I didn't want, again, something that took away from my yellow opals. So I just picked a neutral that had a little variation in color, because I liked that visual interest, but I didn't want it to be distracting. So I'm just gonna string these on here. And these are great, these have great drill holes. They're, as you can see, they're going onto my 24 gauge wire with no problem at all. Same with those yellow opals, went right on. You know, Brios can be very tough as far as drill hole size. You'll get one, especially hand drilled, you will get one side you could drive a truck through, and then one side that you can't even find the other hole. So these are drilled really nicely, really evenly all the way through. And they are available on jtv.com. If so, we were out of stock for a while and we got them back in, which is super exciting because I love them. And obviously so did you guys. Okay, one more. So I've got all of my Sunstone and Feldspar beads strung on here. And now we are just going to, I just use my finger. You can, if you have, you know, a little mandrel, you can use a little mandrel, or if you want to use your round nose pliers to help you create this like kind of teardrop shape, I just kind of bring it back onto itself like this. And then we are going to use the rest of this wire to create a nice big wrap on here. That is, I'm going to wrap it down over the end of my opal here, and I'm really going to create some stability so that there's not a whole lot of movement in this opal. Get that standing upright, and then I'm just going to tighten this up with my pliers. And so I've stabilized this so this should not move much at all in that kind of setting. And just gently tuck my tails in. I just like to make sure I like the way it looks. And I think keeping it a little funky, kind of, you know, I don't want it to be too boring. So I like to keep it a little funky and kind of make some kind of wackier wraps or some looser wraps. Not too loose because we don't want our wraps catching on anything, but overlapping them and stuff like that kind of catches your eye. You know, that metal, when it's overlapped on another piece of metal, catches the light differently, and it draws your eye in. You know, if you're walking past something and like something shiny catches your eye, you're going to stop and look at it. And little things like that can help do that. So we are going to do the same thing to the rest of our Brios. Okay, so let's start with our medium-sized Brio. Exact same thing. Grab my Brio. I'm going to cut myself a couple inches. I'm going to do a little bit more because on this one, I'm going to create like a little bit fuller wrap there, just to show you guys kind of the difference. Grab a little bit more wire here, and then I will string my opal. Again, we're going to pull both of these up and cross them right above our opal. And then my long piece, I'm going to kind of bend this up so it's going straight up, and that's the piece that I'm going to use to wrap around with my smaller beads. This piece right here, again, we're going to just give this a twist. So that's nice and tight, not too tight. And then I'm going to wrap down around my brio to start kind of stabilizing that. And again, I'm not worried about how this looks because I'm just going to cover it up as you guys saw with that one. Tuck that little tail in. And now I'm going to use a little bit less sunstone and feldspar than I did on that bigger one, just to kind of further exaggerate the height difference that we're going to end up with. Okay, so now we are ready to make our loop out of our smaller beads. So just keeping these kind of pushed down towards, that's going to help too create like a nice tight loop. Keeping them pushed down towards your brio and then doing the bend so that you don't end up with a bunch of gaps kind of between your smaller beads. So I've brought this around, down and around, and then we're going to start wrapping down onto our brio. So pulling that tight again so that I don't have too much movement in these smaller beads here. So I'm going to hold those smaller beads, and then I'm going to wrap with my 24 gauge wire, and I'm going to come down around my brio and come back up and make it a little wackier. And then I can go in with, see how this drop that is kind of a funky shape? I can go in with my pliers and kind of reshape that a little bit. Let's see, we've got one that's a little bit more uniform. I like the look of that, and we've got one that's a little bit wackier, and I like the look of that. So it's just personal preference. One is not more secure than the other. There's really, not necessarily a right or wrong answer there. Just as long as you're wrapping enough to secure the tip of that brio, you're not going to end up with any breakage there. So we have our last one, and for our last one, I chose this Mexican fire opal, and it's a little bit different shape. Well, it's a lot of bit different shape. It is kind of a squattier brio. It's a little bit fatter and shorter, and I just wanted to switch it up a little bit. And I say visual interest a lot because you've got to make it visually interesting what you're making. But to create that by using like a little bit different shape and a little bit different color. So this is more of an orange color, but it's still got that yellow undertone like those yellow opals. It's still in the same warm family of colors, but it's just different enough to be interesting. So I will do the exact same thing here. String my brio. And then pull both sides up here. Do a little crisscross. Then I'm going to use my chain nose pliers to create a little twist. I'm going to pull my long side up straight, and then I'm going to use my shorter end to wrap down onto the point of my brio. Like that. We'll cut our tail off, tuck that in, and then we're going to string even less of our sunstone and feldspar to again exaggerate that little height difference there. And you can kind of play around with the proportions and the lengths of these and do it however you like. But I think just little things like changing up the amounts of beads that you use to make the loop just creates, it may not be something that anybody notices, but it looks different enough to where it's different enough to where it catches your eye, but they may not be able to put their finger on what it is that makes it interesting to them. So now we're ready to make our last little loop. And again, I'm just gonna push these beads down and start pulling my wire around, start making a loop shape. And again, trying to pull as much slack out of there as I can so that I don't have any loose stones or any gaps between my stones. So again, I'm going to wire wrap down and around my teardrop. And then tuck that tight in there. And I'm gonna kind of reshape that a little bit. And there are our little Brio trio. So now we're ready to attach these to our charm, and you can do whatever order you want. I kind of like mixed it up a little bit, and I'm gonna do the shorter one in the middle, but they kind of hang on all on top of each other. So however you wanna do it. So I'm gonna split this open a little bit and slide my drops on. Like this. And now we're ready to attach our chain. So one thing we have about JTV is we have an incredible selection of chain. We have unfinished chain, finished chain, we have gold tone chain, silver tone chain, copper chain, antique bronze chain, gunmetal chain. We have any kind of chain you could ever want. So if you are low on chain, or if you are wanting to get some new and interesting chain, check out jtv.com and I promise you'll find what you're looking for there. We have no shortage of chain. So I'm going to use a jump ring to attach our little charm holder to our chain because I want to keep this centered in the front. So I'm going to use that jump ring to attach it to an actual link of chain instead of just letting this slide onto a piece of chain, especially one that has a clasp. I'm going to attach it to a link to keep it stabilized in the middle. That way I'm not constantly pulling my clasp around to the back, and I'm really keeping it. It creates like a nice V shape when you attach it to an actual link, and it keeps your clasp in the back. So if you want to add more charms to your charm cluster, you would just open up your jump ring and take it off of your chain, and then add your charms and put your jump ring back on. So I've got my jump ring here, and I wanted to use as small a jump ring as possible that didn't restrict the movement of my piece, but also didn't take away or wasn't distracting. I didn't want a huge gap between the top of my charm cluster and my chain. So I wanted it to sit as nicely as possible and still be able to move nicely. So I've got my jump ring on there, and I'm going to grab a link of chain and slide it through that link, and then use my other chain nose plier to rock these two ends back and forth and really tighten up that opening of this open jump ring and get it nice and flush. And there we go. I'll put it on today. So that is our teardrop cluster necklace, and I love it. And again, you can play with the placement of these. You can, have one be more in the front, or you can make them taper down or graduate in size. And I think it'd be really cool to add your own personal charms to it. That's all. Let's go back over the tools and supplies that we use for this project. Rawhide mallet, chasing hammer, ring mandrel, bench block, chain nose pliers, round nose pliers, flush cutter, 18 gauge wire, and 24 gauge wire, yellow opal and Mexican fire opal, and we used a piece of chain. If you need any of the tools and supplies that we use for this project, check out the links in the description below. I want to know if you say briolet, briolette, or brio. I also want to know what other projects you want to see us make with whatever you call them. Let us know in the comments below. And while you're down there, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks, guys.